Kia ora koutou. Before we kick off today, I'm just going to start with a karakia. Pakataka te hau ki te uru, pakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai. He hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauriora. Ina reo, i ngā mana raurangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ka tū te mihi atu ki a koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai, nau mai. Whakatau mai. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora koutou. Welcome to the last of our online hui. Relating to the draft freshwater plan change. I'm just going to run through our agenda for tonight. So I'm Ruben Wiley. I'm the Group Manager for Environmental Services at the Northland Regional Council, and I'll be your MC this evening. We've got a series of panelists who will be available to answer questions at the end of the hui. And prior to that, we'll be going through a series of presentations, firstly by Justin Murfitt, our Senior Policy Specialist, followed by Troy Brockbank, one of our Tāngata Whenau Water Advisory Group. And finally, Leon Kiefer will be talking further about some of the specific changes that are being put forward through the draft freshwater plan change. So we've got, we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the kōrero today. You'll see that there's a question button that you can click on and ask those questions. So what we'll be doing is at the end of the three presentations, we'll be opening up the floor to our panelists, and they'll be responding to those questions, and we'll do our best to get through all of those questions. Those that we don't get through, we will be putting online and responding to. And this video, these presentations will also be recorded and put online for people to view later. So just on our panel today, we have three of our councillors, Jack Craw, Marty Robinson, and Joe Carr, I think. We've also got Karina Ross from a Primary Sector Liaison Group, and also the presenters for each of the presentations will be on the panel too to also answer questions. So from this point, I'll hand the mic over to Councillor Jack Craw to give an opening.
Kia ora koutou. Welcome everybody, and thanks for taking the time to join. I know we're all pretty busy, and it's nice to have people interested in asking questions apart from the normal type of feedback that we normally seek in submissions. We've been working on this, and staff and experts have been working on this plan for over a year now, and we don't make any apology for it being ambitious, but what we have taken is a very, very long-term view. And the draft, I'd really like you to be fully aware that whatever provisions that are written into the plan won't be implemented overnight. Some of them have between 5 and 10 and sometimes 12-year implementation phase. So there won't be any surprises. But of course, what actually is in the plan is up to you. We really will be guided by the kind of feedback we receive. Now we've had feedback. We've been consulting right from the start with Primary Sector Group and iwi, hapu, and we've used an awful lot of science. I know that we've had some feedback from MPI who monitor these plans and said that they were very impressed with our plan and that it's fully informed by science. There's no assumptions really in the plan. And of course, the last thing I would like to say is that the government has put a halt to implementation date, so that whatever happens will be delayed another perhaps 2 years. So, and perhaps more. So yeah, everyone take a deep breath. Nothing's going to happen overnight. So I'll put you back now to Ruben to MC the evening. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Jack. Thank you for that. And so I'll pass on to our first presenter, Justin. And just a quick reminder, bring those questions in. The more questions, the better, and we'll get through as many of them towards the end of the evening.
Kia ora tātou. My name's Justin Murfitt. I'm a policy analyst with the Northland Regional Council. I'll just do a brief presentation on the background to the freshwater plan change, why Council embarked on this project, and some of the issues that it's actually trying to grapple with for the Northland region. So, yes, as Councillor Crewell mentioned, the government has sort of extended the deadline for this, and has signalled also that they're going to change the key driver for this, which is national direction from government, or previous government, around how councils manage freshwater. That said, we still have pretty challenging issues with our freshwater quality in Northland. So there is still value in the debate with the community and stakeholders and Tāngata whenua, and certainly encourage you to get your feedback in by the end of the month, because we're still looking for that. So I'll quickly cover what it is, and what our issues are for the region, and then Leon, who will present later, will talk some of the detail how it might affect you, and then the Q&A. So what is it? Essentially, it's a package of draft rule changes and actions that Council has put out for feedback. As I said, it's been driven by direction from the previous government around freshwater management, called the NPS Freshwater, National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. So it's a suite of draft changes to regional rules and draft actions that Council could undertake to help manage freshwater. Rules alone can't do it. On the ground, actions alone can't do it. It sort of needs a bit of a combination approach. In terms of the freshwater regional rules, we are limited to freshwater. We can't dive into sort of coastal space or rules around moorings in the marine area, or say discharges to air or things like that. We are pretty tightly confined to freshwater. Key point here is that these draft rule changes that are out, they have no legal effect. They are essentially just Council's initial thinking around how we might go about changing the rules, what rules we might need to change, and it's Council's opportunity to test some of the concepts. Some of them are new and a bit different to where we've been previously, but all the feedback we get on that, those potential ideas will help us get a better product at the end of the day. As Jack also mentioned, we have a longer deadline now. Previously, we were working to notifying a formal plan change by the end of this year. We now have to 2027. That's a huge relief. Gives us a lot more time to do more engagement and more thinking, and rather than run pell-mell towards the end of this year, yeah, we've got a lot more time. So what's in the draft freshwater plan change package? So one of the key documents is a marked up version of our freshwater provisions in our regional plan. So basically new content is underlined, and content that could be removed has strike through in it. So you can sort of see what would change quite easily. As I said, that's confined to the freshwater provisions only. Draft action plan, that's a bit of a summary of some of the non-regulatory, like not rules or more action on the ground that Council could undertake to support improving freshwater. Things like funding for riparian planting, fencing, and things like that. And potentially more compliance activities and the like, advocacy and education, or a range of things, right through to rates relief potentially and subsidising consent processes. There's a couple of key discussion documents as well, and I really encourage you to look at these. One on potential rule changes around, or options for rule changes around managing stock access to riparian areas and highly erodible land. Council did not land any rules at all. Instead, given the implications, and Council's very aware of what those are and the costs, particularly for landowners, Council preferred to put out a suite of options around, and they're no means the end of the story, around what that could look like. So just different setbacks from waterways for livestock access, and potentially controls on livestock on what we call highly erodible land. Another discussion document out on targeted water allocation policy. This is essentially what we might call a novel approach to how water might be allocated in the region, with a particular focus on perhaps reserving a fraction of available water that can be allocated for environmental improvements and use for Māori in terms of land returned through settlements, or for papakainga or marae drinking water. But more detail on that in a minute. The other key thing that I really encourage you to look at is a GIS map viewer. This is one of the key elements in that viewer, is a new approach to identifying what could be used for identifying land susceptible to erosion. And it's sort of using a slope-based approach, 2 layers, land over between 25 and 35 degrees, and land over 35. There's a good argument that slope is a key driver of erosion risk, but we'll get into that more detail on that as well. So as we've mentioned, we have a new longer deadline to get into the formal stages of this. That's a notify a proposed plan. Now, the end of 2027. We've also heard that the government intends to review or revise the national policy statement that's driving a lot of this, the draft freshwater plan change. We don't know what that looks like, but they have suggested that it might be done sort of mid-2026 or so. So we're not sure what it's going to look like and what difference it might mean for this process. But we certainly welcome the extension. It's a huge relief, particularly for staff, and I'm sure the community as well, to have a bit more time. But receiving your feedback on this draft is still vital. It will certainly influence how we go about the next phase. I won't dwell on this slide. It's essentially the process map, if you like, that the previous government expected regional councils to go through as part of developing this plan change. It's got some really fundamental and quite important elements to it. A key one, a Te Mana o Te Wai hierarchy. Basically, that says councils, any decisions, you've got to put the well-being of waterways first, health needs of people second, and pretty much everything else, the economy and the like, third. Another key element in here is the compulsory attributes, i.e. things we have to monitor and manage when going about this process. So it's got 22 water quality attributes, they're called, things we need to, they're sort of indicators of waterway health. They are quite a lot of science required to actually go through that and see where Northland sits in terms of these indicators. Another key element is national bottom lines, basically minimum standards for water that apply across New Zealand, and council have no discretion. They must at least meet those standards over time. It's a big challenge for the likes of Northland. We don't look so great against some of those national bottom lines. The other key thing in this NPS freshwater is we've got to at least maintain water quality. You can't allow a degradation of the state of water. So it's, in a nutshell, very prescriptive. It doesn't give council and communities a lot of wriggle room about applying discretion and how they might go about things. It's kind of set, and it also sets what we need to manage and essentially sets targets where we're not meeting national bottom lines. So what challenges are we facing in the region? Well, we've got a few, but the biggies, three big ones, if you like: sediment and erosion processes. Sediment's a widespread issue across Northland. You'll all have seen it, particularly during heavy rain. Rivers and estuaries tend to go a bit of a brown colour. It is a difficult one to manage. We're dealing with a legacy of land use change over generations, and it's not a quick fix. It's impacting right across our fresh and coastal waterways, from all sorts of values like recreation, the ability to use water, fresh water particularly, ecological state in freshwater and estuaries, and it's a big one for us. We've got a lot of sort of erosion susceptible land. E. coli contamination. E. coli is essentially an indicator of fecal contamination or risk of getting sick from contact with fresh water. It's a human health measure rather than an ecological one. We've got basically measures set in the MPS freshwater where we sort of grade Northland, and I'll get into more detail on that, but that's not a pretty picture either. And the other challenge we have, which is fairly pervasive as well, is just the degraded habitat or ecosystem health of waterways. A lot of causes for that, obviously water quality and things like sediment. Temperature is a big one, lack of shade. So yeah, these are fairly major challenges, and they're not simple quick fixes. So just a bit more detail on the sediment picture for Northland. As I said, it's pretty widespread. We have a lot of quite erodible geology, relatively steep terrain, and lots of waterways to sort of distribute that. And we often also subject to pretty heavy rainfall and weather events. So we've got there's a few measures of sediment in terms of what the MPS is telling us the attributes. Visual clarity is one, and what we call dissolved phosphorus is another. The visual clarity data, and if you look at the map on the left there, you'll see some sort of coloured dots, red being very poor and up to blue being really good. Now, that doesn't look too bad, but there is a bit of a caveat with that, in that our visual clarity samples are taken during sort of medium to low flows rather than high flows, largely due to health and safety. And we know a lot about sediments coming down during sort of moderate to heavy rain. So we don't think we're picking up the actual sediment discharge or the loads that we're actually experiencing. What might be a better indicator of our sediment problem is the map on the right there, where you can see a lot more red dots and a lot more those fine filigree red lines indicate that's modeled data. The dots are our monitored sites, so that's actual data from rivers. So we think we've got that's a better indicator of the problem, because phosphorus is quite high in some of our geology, and it tends to bind to sediment and travels with sediment. So if we're getting a lot of phosphorus in our sampling, that's an indicator of the sediment issue. The sources of sediment vary, and it depends where you are in the landscape and what the geology is, the terrain and the like, and the land cover. But the key sources are land disturbance, that's sort of earthworks, vegetation clearance, highly erodible land, much more prone to movement and erosion, and stream bank erosion, that's water coming down at a high velocity and tearing the banks of rivers and the like, and tearing the sediment out of the edges and moving that downstream. Again, it's a bit of a legacy issue, and it's going to take a wee while to fix. E. coli, again, just an indicator of health risk from contact with fresh water. We've got a national requirement to improve under the MPS. The aim is to get a large chunk of New Zealand's waterways into a sort of a swimmable state, if you like. Now, Northland's picture is not great. Again, we've got about 94% of our our river sites that we monitor in a very poor or poor condition in terms of what the MPS grading applies. Again, we've done some modelling, and that suggests that holds true outside of modelled river sites as well. Key sources, it's basically fecal contamination from warm-blooded animals, farm animals, humans, pest animals, birds, and the sort of dominance of the sources will vary depending on where you are. If you're in bush, it's probably more likely pest animals and birds. If you're in an agricultural settings, more likely farm animals. But down the bottom of the catchments, it's probably a combination of the lot. And in residential settings, it might be more human. But we do have some science that suggests ruminants are likely the most common and widespread source. E. coli is probably one of the sort of contaminants that can respond quite quickly as opposed to sediment, say. Keeping stock out of waterways, better management of effluent and the like can actually turn that picture around quite quickly. And it's not a measure of ecological state, it's a human health value indicator. Macroinvertebrates. Now, this is, as I mentioned before, we've got an issue with degraded aquatic habitats. This is one of the measures of that. It's called macroinvertebrates. Essentially, in a nutshell, it's a measure of the insect life, the abundance and variety in our rivers. More than 50% of our rivers fail the national bottom line in the MPS freshwater. That's a massive challenge because it's a very complex attribute to manage. There are multiple influences on this indicator. As you can imagine, water quality plays a big part, but there's also flows. Like if you've got very a modified flow regime, i.e. there's a lot of water taken out for extraction, then that habitat quality isn't there, the temperature can be higher, the lack of shading, and so on. So those are not quick fixes, again, and potentially quite a cost. Imagine most of our native life, aquatic life, is adapted to running through bush-clad streams, and we've lost a lot of that riparian cover. So this is going to be a biggie. And I think that is me. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Justin. Thank you for that. And before I hand the mic over to Troy, our next presenter, I just want to thank all those who have put some questions through to us, and just encourage all the other attendees, if you have any questions around the topics that are being discussed or anything to do with the freshwater draft freshwater plan change in general, please put them forward. We will do our best to answer them. And so without further delay, I will hand over to Troy. Kia ora, Troy.
Yeah, kia ora, Ruben. Ngā mihi nui kia koe, moto mihi, kia au, I tēnei pō. Kia tātou katoa I hakorongo mai ana, tēnā tātou. Ko waia hau, he uri o te tai tokerau, he mokopona ahau o tarutaru, o raheri, o hini amaru, o kahi nui tia, o parata, o manaia noki. I tupu ake au te tai tokerau, no te tai tokerau ahau, ko Troy Brockbank ahau. Yeah, it's just a real privilege to be here tonight to be able to present the work that TWAG, or the Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group, has played a part in this whole process. But before I get a bit into it, I just wanted to kind of, first off, talk a little bit about what I see as some of the challenges we face in terms of freshwater from my own personal perspective. And then, like I said, I'll get into the work of TWAG. And then also what I think are some of the key opportunities for Tāngata Whenua to get involved with freshwater planning reforms that are right in front of us at the moment. And especially to provide, or how and where and why we should be providing some feedback to Council, Northland Regional Council, on this draft freshwater plan change, but also the action plan as well. Now, why is this important? Well, this is the reason this is important for our people, for our whānau, for our hapori out there, for our iwi, really because it increases our opportunity to be involved in actively promoting our fresh water. From being being of the hapu, being of the iwi, we are the kaitiaki. We have these obligations and responsibilities, and it's through this freshwater plan change that we can very voice what those obligations are and ways in which we can go forward and exercise manatiaki and kaitiakitanga. It's very important because the actions through these freshwater plan change will support our whānau out there with and the kaitiaki with riparian margin planting, with wetland restoration, but also rules that might mean you need to get consents or fence off waterways, steep hill country, erosion prone land, and the likes. Certain whenua that perhaps is adding to the problem per se. Not to say we shouldn't be doing things in these areas, but we need to get a bit smarter and we need to start thinking about the environment more in the land activities that we do. It also might mean it might affect whenever there are any water available in the future for our papakanga, but also our marae across Te Tai Tokiro, across the rohe. At a hapu level, the draft freshwater plan and action plan might mean increasing requests for, or they may mean there will be more requests for the likes of cultural impact assessments, cultural advice, basically stating how we as tangata whenua want Te March Wai to be enacted, to be implemented through the many different projects there are regarding freshwater management. It also will increase opportunities to be actively involved in freshwater management, but more importantly, the decision making. There are also actions proposed to do more detailed freshwater planning to define hapuri wai, our water catchments, our rohe awa in the future. For our iwi, this might mean that they have to look at our commercial operations, because there's often this conflict between what we need to do as an iwi to generate income, to generate revenue, but then also a conflict with our obligations to look after the whenua to ensure that's here for the next generations to continue their obligations in protecting it, but also to enjoy our freshwater catchments in the most pristine condition that we can give to them. It's really up to us now, as those who are walking this whenua, it's the actions that we undertake that are really going to make the difference for that next generation. If we continue to go in the path that we are, or even worse, if we decide to degrade waterways further, there will be nothing left, and these things will be gone. And once the waterways are polluted, once they're full of sediment, it's very hard to bring them back to life. It might also mean that there's more support for water being allocated for development of Māori land, but then also with regards to settlement assets. Now, at this time, there is a lot of noise out there. We've recently just had the 3 waters, affordable waters bills repealed by the current government. We've had the RMA kind of brought back from the underworld. We've had all these things happening. This particular stream or work stream on the freshwater management and freshwater plan change is not affected by those other ones to date. So it is still going ahead, but a bit with the delayed or pushed out dates, we should say, for when they have to be enacted. So we do have a bit of more time up our sleeves, but that means that we can get more on the ground, get out more in the community, have more discussions around freshwater, and really get this right, because we may not have another chance like this to do this again. So it's really up now, right now, as the opportunity in front of us to influence what's going to be in the plan, and to really set us up for not just our children's generation, but their children's generation, the generation of mokopuna. So let me share some of my personal thoughts, or more of my personal thoughts on what I think are the key challenges are. Well, we have a legacy of colonization. We have a legacy of bad management decisions that have left our Wai in a very bad way. So not only do we have to change where, what, and how we're farming, or how all the land activities that we're doing on this land. So it's not just the farmer's fault, it's all of our fault here. We need to also look and need to change in how we make decisions about freshwater as well. And it's not small changes are needed. We're talking about huge changes. We're talking about shifting the tide. As the ever-increasing effects of climate change are felt, with increasingly severe droughts, storms, floods, the āwhais coming, increasing temperatures and sea levels rise, and more wildfires, the ability of our awa, our roto, our ripo, so our streams, our lakes, our wetlands to adapt to these changes is going to be critical. And we know that the healthier the ecosystem is, the healthier our biodiversity is, the more resilient it will be to climate change. They are suffering at the moment. So it's not all good news that freshwater is in a dire state. And we don't have long to fix the situation so that our waterways and our communities are healthy and the best position to deal with the increasing impacts of global warming as we can be. When you think about this from a Māori point of view, ko au te taio, ko te taio ko au. I'm the environment is us. The environment is not ahead of us. We are not ahead of the environment. We are one and the same. If the environment is unhealthy, we as people are unhealthy. If the environment disappears, there's no need for people. We will perish. If we perish, there's no point to having the environment. So we need to have this balance. We need to have this reciprocal relationship to look at the health and the mood of our environment and do our best in all that we can, really, to ensure that it is healthy and it prospers now and in the future. Tāngata whenua need to be empowered and enabled so that we can properly fulfill our kaitiaki roles and obligations, and also ensure that we can access the safe and clean water we were given. We need, given the only increasing pressures we know climate change is bringing. Colonization, separation from our lands, and the disempowerment of our kaitiaki has meant that the Western way of looking at the world has lost sight of the knowledge and the wisdom that we hold as mana whenua, as the indigenous people of this world, of this land, and the significant contribution we make as proactive kaitiaki. We all need to understand that this is a stake. Well, what is that stake? And we need to work together if we are truly prepared for a sustainable future. Tātou mā, now is the time to get involved in the planning, time to get involved in the legislative reform and equip ourselves with the skills and the resources needed to participate, whether that is on our own marae, within our own kōrero, our circles, talking to our whānau. It's up to us now to plan for the future. All of our communities need to know what these changes mean for us, and that is going to take time, resources, and capacity across all of Te Tai Tokiro. Now, we can't do this alone, whānau. It's not just up to Tāngata whenua. We need everyone on this waka, and we need to support each other on this journey. If we want the environment to be healthy, if we want our Wai to be healthy, we all need to do this together. The whittle for all of us is how we can better utilize our combined mātauranga, our combined pukenga, and to ensure all of our people are enabled and supported to have their say. Our taio and our Wai are sick right now. They are crying out to us to help us. They need us to support them, but we also need them. Now, this is a huge challenge. So how can we turn around how freshwater is being treated and valued? How can we weave together two differing worldviews, one based on whakapapa and ngā atua, the treasures, our taonga, such as Wai is our taonga, and also as a living being, and the other based on man having dominion over nature and seeing water as a resource to be used and profited from. These are the conflicts that we see in front of us. To kind of address this, it was the Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group, or TWAG, was formed. We are a group or a rōpū of kaitiaki and technicians in the water industry, from freshwater to infrastructure waters, planning, policy, engineers across all different professional backgrounds, and we all whakapapa back to Te Tai Tokero. We were set up in conjunction with the NRC at the end of 2020 to provide advice and active engagement to Council on what this new freshwater planning regime might look like from a Tāngata Whenua perspective. Now, we're unapologetic here. We're looking at this from a Tāngata Whenua perspective, first and foremost, but acknowledging within that worldview is everyone. Tāngata Whenua, Tāngata Tiriti, Tāngata Aotearoa. We were also asked to give Council advice on how they could engage with Tāngata Whenua on this freshwater plan change. This online hui is one of our recommendations for a series of hui throughout the Council's freshwater plan process, along with various other recommendations. I'd like to acknowledge all the members of the group, past and present, and in particular to acknowledge Tui Shortland, prior to becoming chair and then deputy chair of NRC. She was very much a part of TWAG and was actually one of the co-authors of this document you see on the screen here, or the cover of this document. This was the first report that we produced as TWAG 2 years ago. She helped lead us through a series of wānanga, looking at all the issues and values identified in the various hapu and iwi management plans that Council has been given, and much, much more. And through this, we came up with some founding advice, which we have continued to build upon, along with all the others that have been involved in this amazing kaupapa. We've developed their founding work into recommendations as to what might go into this freshwater plan change from a Tāngata Whenua perspective as a platform, so that our whānau, our marae, our hapu, our iwi can add their own perspectives and voices as Council develops its plan change over the next couple of years. Now, this has taken a huge amount of time, a huge amount of energy. We've been working flat out on this since 2020, January 2020. There's been more than 60 TWAG workshops, meetings between ourselves as TWAG, meetings with iwi and hapu, workshops with councillors, workshops with council staff, countless meetings, countless Zoom meetings, calls, email exchanges. All of this have led to this point in front of us today. We've distilled all that information and all our recommendations into a couple of reports. And these were provided to Te TMAC, or the Te Tai Tokero Māori Advisory Committee, I think it's called. And these were endorsed to Council. TWAG representatives also participated in 13 workshops with councillors, a couple of them on this call tonight. And together, we went through all the different various aspects of the freshwater plan change. We heard the views from councillors, they heard the views from TWAG, and we met in the middle. It was amazing. A really good use of time, really good use of discussion, and very, very proactive, I should say. We've also been involved in numerous meetings, like I said, with the council staff, and we've helped define and redefine the provisions in response to feedback from both councillors and those we've been talking in the community about. The ability for us to work more closely with staff to refine and respond to questions as they come up has been invaluable. It has given us as TWAG more of an insight into the mahi ahead of us, but also just having that back and forth dialogue and occasionally just, can you meet in this meeting in 5 minutes if something was very urgent, and then we kind of get together. It's been a huge time commitment, especially from a handful of us. But it's been very proactive, and it's gotten us to where we are today in terms of this freshwater plan change. But it is sometimes a challenging space as well to be in, particularly trying to weave together a te ao Māori view, or a te ao Māori way of viewing the world, and one where economic imperatives are dominance or predominance. It entailed a huge amount of sustained effort from TWAG members, and we hope that we've come up with what we have come up with provides a very good basis for others to add their kōrero on and to make this even better. TWAG has been very fortunate to have the help from numerous different contractors along this route as well, and special shout outs go to Kohu Planning and Consult and Strategy, and also to Paddle Delamore Partners for helping us with workshops and also drafting our recommendations. And also our Kāhui Kaumātua who've been providing ongoing advice to us along this route. And yes, a very big shout out to our Mātua Hori Parata. He gave us a real kick up the backside in one wānanga and really put us on this how do I say inspirational but momentous path in front of us. He gave us some real motivational words of wisdom. And when we had our wānanga ngā rara tunua marae in late August 2022. If you're wondering, hey, we've been talking about this thing for a while, but if you're wanting to have a look at it, you can all find all of our reports, the 3 reports that we've done, a stage 1 report, a stage 2, which is ngā roimata o ngā atua, which you can see the cover there on the screen, and also the voices of Ngā Wai Māori, which is a case study of different projects in Te Tai Tokiro. But you can find all of those reports in full on the Council's Why It Matters webpage, and later today you'll see a link to that. But I just wanted to highlight some of our thinking and how we see the advice that we've been given to Council, providing a platform or holding place, if you like, for everyone to add as the Council develops a freshwater plan change further in the next couple of years. So we've been very clear to Council that our advice is that they need to support everyone so that they can engage in this freshwater plan change if they wish to the extent that they can, to the extent that they want to be involved. Our advice does not constitute consultation or engagement with tangata whenua. We aren't tangata whenua. We're not mandated by tangata whenua to talk on behalf of tangata whenua. We are not the hapu. We are purely a group of like-minded individuals from the water background with water professional studies and careers. So we've kind of come together as this collective to provide a baseline, a way forward. But this is why it's really important, whānau, to have a look at this freshwater plan change and to submit and to put in your submissions on what's working well in the plan and what needs to change. Any advice is better than no advice. It is also impossible to provide advice at a level of detail that only can come from our local communities, our whānau, our hapu, our marae, and our kaitiaki on the ground. So our advice is by necessity, is high level, and we hope it does provide that framework for others to add to reflect the different values and perspectives that exist across Te Tai Tokiro. Every hapu is different, every whānau is different. So whānau, get out there, have a look at this plan change, and please, please send in your submissions. Voice your voice. We do not think that there are many values or issues of concern about the state of our freshwater that are common across Te Tai Tokiro. But central to all our thinking is Te Huri Hanga Wai. I've included what we propose for a statement as to what Te Mano Te Wai means in Te Tai Tokiro as a starting point for others to comment on. We've also come up with policies and objectives, attributes and targets that we hope others will think about and add to in their feedback to NRC on this draft plan change. And we propose values and visions which are high enough level to be able to be used everywhere, anywhere, allowing each marae, each hapu, each whānau to add to these region-wide provisions to recognise everyone's particular tikanga and mātauranga around water, around our wai. I also want to stress that weaving together Te Ao Māori and Western worldviews to improve the mauri of our wai is a challenge for some. For example, roles and duties associated with rangatiratanga and kaitiakitanga can only be carried out by whānau, marae, hapu and iwi, as we have a responsibility through whakapapa to care and to protect our waters. It is hard for council to fully understand some of these concepts that are fundamental to how we look after water, but I tell you what, working more closely with them, we've been able to express these and share our discussions amongst both councillors, both the staff, to kind of get to this common place on what really matters. And there's no underlying, we're all looking at the same outcomes. The outcome is looking after our wai. Whatever words end up in the council's freshwater plan when it's notified and when it goes through to the freshwater hearings process, whatever those words are, it is also critical that we work to make sure that implementation also involves us as tangata whenua. Beyond water monitoring, where we exercise our rangatiratanga and decision-making on consent are needed underneath this new freshwater plan change, for example. It's going to take time. It's going to take resources. The Freshwater Action Plan includes several actions that have been proposed by TWAG, and in particular, the need for council to work at community level and with us to define appropriate hapuri wai, rohi awa, catchments, water catchments, freshwater management units, our visions, the values, the objectives, all at a local level, so we can build on a regional level approach taken so far. Council has included all of these in their proposed action, as a proposed action in their draft action plan. Now, this is a draft action plan, so we need you to submit your feedback, your comments on these draft plans. These plans are also included recommendations to progress greater involvement of tangata whenua in freshwater management across Te Tai Tokerau. Now, there's a huge amount of work that has gone into this draft freshwater plan change, which is a very large document itself and perhaps not so much of an easy read for some. But for TWAG, there are a few key aspects that I just want to highlight tonight that we see as being very fundamental. As I mentioned before, we need greater level of detail that can only come from council engaging with tangata whenua and communities to define their visions and what their values are for their wai. What is going to take, that is going to take time, it's going to take energy, it's going to take a lot of resourcing. But this so means that this needs to be also funded to be able to do that. If we want to be part of this, we need to be funded to be able to be part of it. There's no guarantee that the resourcing is going to come to do that work either. So we need to get smart about how we do this, and we need to, put in the hard yards at the same time. But acknowledging nobody can do this for nothing. The next is our recommendation for all water to be given legal personhood. By that, we mean that all water to be treated with respect as a living entity with its own rights to be healthy and thrive. It has its own mana and needs to be acknowledged as such. There's already a lot of precedent in Aotearoa that you'll be familiar with, the legal personhood status, being confirmed through statute like the Whanganui River, the Te Awa Tupua Act, which was done in 2017, along with other geographical features like Turiweras, and also Taranaki, and more recently, Taranaki Maunga. Whilst we understand that NRC cannot give legal personhood status through treaty settlements, there are examples from around the world where local governments, Indigenous people, and communities have provided legal protection for rivers. Council has agreed to do further work at what this may look like in practice, and this is one of the work streams we're going to be looking at shortly. But also what options are available for appointing kaitiaki guardians to speak on behalf of the wai. Now, this is a key aspect in realigning a Western world view that has treated rivers as water infrastructure resources to be utilized to be more balanced approach. But we need to look at it more as acknowledging a Te Ao Māori worldview where rivers are living entities and intertwined with our whenua and us our communities through whakapapa. One of the key policies that we will recommend, that we have recommended to council, and they haven't put it into the draft plan change, was one which reserves an allocation of water for targeted users. However, we have agreement that put it into a separate consultation document. And again, we would really much like your feedback and your submissions on our proposed or a way forward for water allocation in Te Tai Tokerau. The policy we propose would implement some of the key values and targets to basically set aside 20% of any water that has been allocated for 4 specific purposes. These are for environmental enhancement, so restoration of wetland or creation of new wetlands, for example, but also for domestic use by papakainga and marae, and also for use on Māori land. The final use is a catch-all, so any other use as long as it contributes to a fund. We haven't actually made any suggestions as to how much exactly what this fund would be used for or any details. But what we do know is that in order to fix up our wai, to fix up our waterways at the speed we need to, it is going to cost money. It is going to cost time, it is going to cost energy, it is going to cost money. It is just going to cost. So the question is, where's that money going to come from? So we propose this as a mechanism, this fund as a mechanism to which those who are applying for a consent to take water, if they aren't for any other purposes, then they could contribute to this fund that can then be used to help cover the cost of the work we know needs to be done. For us, that fund could be used to pay for wetland restoration, riparian margins along our waterways, native forest restoration on highly erodible land, fencing, and all these things that landowners are otherwise not going to be able to afford to do, but perhaps would like to do. One of the other reasons we propose this targeted water allocation policy is to ensure that there is an opportunity for development of Māori land and treaty settlement assets, for which access to fresh water is essential. Northland's economy can benefit from Māori development, and enabling that to happen by reserving a portion of allocatable water will go some ways towards that. It's a key policy for us that also recognises the need to restore the mauri of our wai across Te Tai Tokerau, and by allowing more water for the rivers, more waters for wetlands is critical. We really encouraged feedback on this proposal, on all of these draft documents, all of the consultation supporting documents. We hope that Council will include this policy in the notified version of the plan change in the coming years. We've also recommended policies which the Council has included in the draft plan change. Most were some amendments which reflect the roles and responsibilities Tāngata whenua have as kaitiaki in rangatira, and that reflect our whakapapa and relationships with wai. Weaving together both Western science and Te Ao Māori provides a strengthened approach to freshwater management that is urgently needed. We do need each worldview. They supplement each other so well, they're innovative, and we need to bring them closer together, but not to replace one another. So this whole leads on to the final aspect on which I would like to highlight, which is we're recommending increasing the activities which require a cultural impact assessment. Now, some of you may be thinking, oh my God, not another CIA, not another cultural impact assessment. That has to be done as part of the consent application process. But whānau, these are very important documents. They're important for the consent holders and those, the applicants, but also for the councils. Now, there are numerous instances we're aware of where projects and proposals could have benefited from our local knowledge, our understanding, and undertaking the CIAs is just one way in this toolkit in which tangata whenua can be involved in freshwater management. So we welcome feedback on whether requiring CIAs for the activities that the Council has included in the draft plan change might be effective, or whether there are other activities that should also require CIAs as well. Now I know this is taking a long time, whānau, but we're on the last slide here. So this is a huge task ahead of us, but we have this opportunity right now in front of us, an opportunity to influence what goes into the new freshwater plan rules for Te Tai Tokerau. You have that. You have this opportunity. You have the influence. Please get out there, have a look at this draft plan and submit. To be honest, this is our opportunity to have a say in what freshwater of the future will look like, and to make the changes we all need so we can have access to clean, healthy freshwater. If you're always out there complaining about resource consent processes and had enough of our waterways being mistreated, this is the opportunity, whānau, to get out there, make a difference, have your say about what will happen in the future. Don't go out there in the community and just voice your opinions. Tell council, voice your feedback, submit. We all need to be supporting each other in this. We need to be working together. If we really want to see the changes we want to in freshwater and how it's looked after, we need to be collaborative, we need to support each other, we need to work together. We've got some excellent projects and initiatives happening right now, and this freshwater plan change can also look at what support and resourcing council provides to support kaitiaki and communities on the ground, whether that's to do monitoring, restoration, enhancement projects, whatever it may be. We need to think about the support needed now to make that happen. And that's why this draft action plan is so critical. That's the action plan itself is where all the financing and all the resources are allocated out where they're set out. That's why it's so important, whānau, to submit your feedback on the draft action plan. Now, this has been a step on a very long journey, and we're continuing to go, and we're not finished. But we need to keep up the momentum. Yes, the government has given us 3 more years, but we shouldn't be slowing down. If anything, we should be haere tonu and keep up the momentum. We only have one chance really to get this right. So, I should say that again. We've got one chance to get the draft right before it gets submitted to the Freshwater Commissioners. So we want to make sure we're collaborative and as close to that solution as we can. And so we need your help, whānau, basically is what I'm saying. So please get involved, and I encourage everyone to get involved, to submit, to talk about this freshwater plan, but more importantly, send your feedback in, whānau. The other thing that's happening right now, whānau, is all these reforms, and like I said, it's a very grey area at the moment. Repeal this, change that. There's a lot of uncertainty out there as well, but that doesn't affect this freshwater plan change right now. This freshwater plan change process is our opportunity to influence what we see happening in Te Tai Tokerau now and in the future. Not the government's influence, our influence as Te Tai Tokerau whānui. Nō reira, ngā mihi nunui ki a koutou mo tō hakorongo ki au, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora. Thank you, everybody.
Kia ora, Troy. Ngā mihi. Thank you for your kōrero, and I just want to extend my gratitude for the mahi that you and your peers at the Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group have put forward in respect of the draft freshwater plan change. It has certainly been a fundamental shift in the way that we work around these particular issues. So ngā mihi to you, Troy, and the Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group. Just a bit of really brief housekeeping. We have been scheduled to close things off at 8 p.m. I see people are still sticking around strong. So thanks to that kōrero, Troy. I think it was a testament to your presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Leon, but if we have strong attendance as we progress through the question time after Leon's presentation, what I'll do is I'll probably just extend the webinar by about 10 minutes, just seeing how we go. So I'll hand over to Leon, and then we'll have Q&A time. And thank you to all those who have put forward your questions. I'm actually blown away by what's coming through. So kia ora koutou, thank you for that. And over to you, Leon.
Thanks, Ruben. Hi, everybody. Yep, so I'm going to give a very brief summary of the rules. Now, this is a recorded presentation, so when we're done, it'll go up onto our website. I'm going to make sure I get all the slides on the screen, but I won't be able to stay on them for very long. So if you're really interested in one of them, come find the recording and have a look, a deeper look for yourself. Really quickly, basically going to talk about some of the key rules and key discussion documents that have the biggest changes for Northland. So here is our one-pager. As Justin noted, we have three main issues: erosion and sediment being one, E. coli contamination being another, and then finally overall ecosystem health. So there are loads of different attributes that we need to manage, and we think that by tackling certain key areas of risk, we can achieve improvements across the board. So number one, protecting highly erodible land. Some of you might be familiar with the maps that we produced. I just want to dispel a rumor real quick. We're not seeking exclusion of stock on hillsides. We understand that this is a commonly held belief. What we are looking to do is introduce management requirements on slopes that do not have vegetation or other means to manage soil erosion. Stock exclusion from waterways. This is a national regulation already for dairy and beef cattle on low slopes. We put the question out, do we need to expand this out to other forms of livestock? Do we need to extend the setback distances? 3 meters is what's currently in law. Do we need to extend that to 5? What about 10? Certain distances have more benefits to environmental values, but of course it comes at an economic loss. So this is something that we want your feedback on. It doesn't necessarily mean fencing. Stock exclusion can be done in other ways, and we can talk about that probably in the questions. The elimination or reduction of discharges to our waterways. So this is whether it's fecal contamination from livestock or from human activity. So this also covers rules around municipal wastewater treatment plants. I saw in the question, this is a really big issue, and we recognize that it is an issue. So the intent of the rules that we have drafted is to remove direct effluent discharges to water, put them onto a land-based application, really minimizing the amount of untreated effluent or fecal contamination that reaches the waterways. It has obvious benefits. I won't go into the details there, but it's a really strong direction from that national policy statement. Controls on exotic forests. Northland is changing very rapidly from predominantly arable pastoral use to pine plantations. The National Environmental Standard for Commercial Forestry is in effect already, and it does provide mitigation and management requires for forestry activities. We think in Northland that we need to be more stringent than what the national regulations provide. So we're looking specifically at really sensitive catchments, such as our dune lakes on the West Coast, some of our outstanding natural rivers, and we also recognize that during earthworks that are undertaken during harvesting or infrastructure construction during the harvest process, there's a really big risk of sediment and erosion that could occur. So we're looking at tightening the requirements on resource consents for plantation forestry. And Troy went into great detail around how we're looking to address impacts on Tāngata whenua values. As Troy pointed out, this is still a draft plan, so we really do need that feedback to make sure that we've captured everything that needs to be captured. So Quickly, discharges to water. So currently, municipal wastewater treatment plants can apply for a resource consent to discharge their treated effluent to water. We want to increase the threshold to get consent, but we also want to prevent any new wastewater treatment plants from being able to do that. So number one, making it more stringent, more difficult for those district council wastewater treatment plants to be able to discharge directly to water, really encouraging that land-based application. And if there are new treatment plants, which there's quite a lot of development, especially in Kaipara district, we do not want new wastewater going into waterways. We're looking for a land-based application. For farm wastewater discharges, if you're a dairy farmer and you have an effluent system, you already have a resource consent to discharge to water. You probably have a hybrid system. What we're looking at is shifting that sort of default to discharge treated effluent to water, move it onto a land-based system. We understand that will cause a lot of concerns around cost and new equipment. So there is a time delay that we'd be looking at taking this into account. The dates on this presentation will be kicked out, of course, to however many years it takes central government to come up with a rewritten NPS, National Policy Statement. So just keep that in mind. But the intention here is to move wastewater out of our water onto the land. For horticultural discharges, horticulture, typically we're not using manure. The commercial horticulture is typically using other fertilizers, and it can be much more controlled. We're not looking at changing the existing rules in our plan. We do have rules, we're just not looking at changing them. Keys to reducing sediment and E. coli. Again, I just want to be clear as well. So we do have a definition of what a river is in our regional plan. So we're not looking at trying to fence off artificial drains. So if you've cut drains in your farm to drain the land, we're not looking at that. We're not looking at irrigation races or water supply races. What we're looking at are those natural rivers. Some of them might be natural modified, maybe 40 years ago, we straightened out a little bit. We want to protect that water, but we're not looking at the artificial drains. We're also not looking at ephemeral streams. So an ephemeral stream is only present when it's raining. So if you have a gully and you have water flowing in it after a rain, but it dries up the next day, we're not looking at that. Stock exclusion on the waterways, as I mentioned, that's already a national requirement in some areas and for some livestock. So we really want you to have a read of that document, have a think about, can we go further back? Maybe we have an averaging approach. Maybe you have 3 meters along one boundary, and then in a certain area you want to put it 10 meters back. I really want to make it clear as well that if you already have waterways fenced off, we're not looking at punishing you by ripping the posts out and moving them 10 meters back. We'd most likely take a much more pragmatic approach where we say we're looking at unfenced streams at this point. And then if your existing fence needs to be replaced in the future, 30 years, maybe 50 years, that's when we'd be looking at meeting the new standard. Managing stock on highly erodible land. So again, this is land over 25 degrees. Again, we're not looking at fencing that off. What we want to do is use the slope as a trigger for a conversation that might end up requiring a resource consent. But the idea here is to say every farm is different. So slope-based system is an easy way to say, yep, let's have a chat. Okay, here's the critical source areas on your farm. This is your soil type. This is your existing vegetation cover. Can we plant more trees in this area, in this area? We need to be a bit more strategic rather than just having carte blanche ability to undertake these activities all over the place. Most farmers that we've talked to already do a really good job, and they've probably already gotten a lot of those areas planted up in some sort of vegetation. You can still graze it, not looking at complete native or pine plantation, but we do need to find a better way of managing those highly erodible soils that we have around the region. And as we mentioned before, we do have a new mapping system. So the map on the left is the old version, not really that accurate. The one on the right, we're purely showing you the data. This is the slope based off of LiDAR. So plane flies over the region, shoots lasers down at the ground, and it measures the topography. We don't have rules around this yet. This is just FYI. These are our sloped, steep lands. So when we do come around to crafting rules, we will be able to look at the best way of managing soils on these slopes. So we might not say, you've got a little bit of yellow here, 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 you have to manage it. We could say, look, this red area over to the southwest, that's your critical area. We really want you to manage that stock. It's right above a wetland or it's right above a river. We've got some active erosion. What can we do to manage it? That's what we're after. We're just after some practical solutions to some very real issues that we have in Northland. The rules will also apply to land preparation, cultivation. So we really want to see less machine tilling, cultivation right up on our river boundaries. So we are looking at increasing the setback, even more so if it's next to an outstanding river. We do know that the freshwater farm plan regulations are also coming in. We don't have control over that, but we might be able to craft the rules that they are able to talk to each other. Vegetation clearance on highly erodible land is something that we also need to consider. So this also applies to plantation forestry, but it also applies to native bush or existing vegetation. This is probably more relevant in areas where you do have a lot of subdivisions and residential development going in. But where we do have plantation forestry, we do want to have a little bit more control over where the forest can go. We want to have make sure that the setback distances away from rivers and lake catchments are well established, and we need to increase our monitoring and enforcement in some of these areas as well. Troy went into detail with a targeted water allocation policy. I won't go into detail here, only to say that it primarily applies to catchments that still have water to be allocated. It will not affect those who have existing resource consents, and it also doesn't take away your right to take water for reasonable domestic use, which is protected already by the Resource Management Act. That includes stock drinking water, and to a certain extent, you know, toilet flushing, showers for your home, etc. So big take-home message: resource consents. It's not saying you cannot do something. It's just saying regional council is required by government to improve our water quality overall, and this is our main tool to do it. So this is a way that we're able to manage what is going into our rivers, into our wetlands, into our lakes, based on the activities that Northlanders undertake. And this is for individuals as well as companies. Cultural impact assessments, Troy said, that will be part of the process. And again, it's a scary thing for those who aren't familiar with the process, but it is a process, and the process is only as good as the people who are engaging in that process. So it's really important to have good relationships, be professional in these interactions, and you will get a really good outcome. So it isn't just a tick box exercise. And that's our website. So please, you probably know it already, but go to that website, fill out the submission form, and let's take questions. Thank you very much. Ruben, over to you.
Kia ora, Leon. Thank you for that. Okay, so we've got a number of questions that have come in, and I'm going to sort of roll a couple of them together just to save a bit of time. We've only got 15 minutes for questions. I will extend it if there's still plenty of people online. So the first series of questions relate to why we're continuing on with the process in light of the changes that have either been made by the government, the new government, or signalled by the government. So I'm just going to briefly answer this, and then I'm going to hand it over to some of the panelists to answer. So I'll first hand it over to Councillor Marty Robinson to answer, and then I'll hand it over to our Primary Sector Liaison Group representative, Karina. So from a staff perspective, one of the greatest challenges that we had with this process was lack of time. We were put in a position where we had to do something really fundamental to one of the key challenges that we have in Tāngata, which is our fresh water. And we had very little time to do it. And so from a staff perspective, the extension in time enables us to continue to work with our communities and continue to give effect to the recommendations that have been put forward by the Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group, and to work out how we can do that with time. And that's one of the greatest challenges that we had. So the quick answer from my perspective is the next 3 years gives us more time to get it right. Okay, so that's one perspective of that. So I'm going to hand over to Councillor Marty Robinson to provide his perspective, and then Karina, I'll hand it over to you to provide a response. Marty.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben, and thank you, everybody listening and looking. There's an intense debate going on in the background there with the Q&A, and really appreciate it. So I'm just going to explain a little bit. This is not whacker farming. I've just written a few notes here. It is an aim to repair damage that has benefited many at the expense of the environment, and also many who use the Wai. Just a point talking about oysters. There was a time after rainfall when you could collect oysters after 12 hours. And then it went to 24 hours. And now it's 48 hours before oysters can be collected. So there's an increased amount of runoff and degradation to the hinterland. And not just the hinterland, but also off streets, out of the urban sewerage plants, out of coming off the roadways. So it is addressing all issues that are degrading the water. So please just don't take this as a whacker farmer. We need a behaviour change by all users, and it's really looking for answers that can accommodate all land users and the general public's needs. So the government direction has just extended the requirement to change. It hasn't said stop, and we don't need the government to tell us what to do the right thing. It's a human aspiration. It's a regional aspiration to do the right thing. And so we've got a lot of detail that's been shown in front of us as to where the problem areas are. Now we want to know your ideas as to how we might be able to change it, so that we can continue land use and continue the benefits that accrue from it, and not degrade the water that so many people rely on. You know, we want to be able to go for a swim. We want to be able to drink the water. We want to be able to fish. The canary in our waters in Waitangi is, can we eat the tuatua and the pipi down in the estuary? And if you can't, well, why not? What behaviour is going on up the Wai that's degrading the river? So what changes to land management and farming, cropping, forestry, or urban use can be made to continue that production, but acknowledge that water bodies and the general public's right to use that water? Remember, it's nobody's water, but it's everybody's water. And we don't have the right to pollute other people's water. It's a community right to be able to enjoy that water. What can we do in that interface of land use and the water? That isn't just taking land out of production. It isn't a cost to fence, but there's activities that might be able to happen in that space that can pay those costs. So what we're really wanting, the feedback, is how can you come up with some bright ideas, come up with some zany ideas. You can plant trees there, you can plant harakeke, you can plant rongoa, you can replant manuka, that can all have a beneficial aspect in stopping pollution, but might also be able to have honey for bees. It might be able to have rongoa, it might be able to have harakeke for instance, for textiles. So give us your feedback on that. we really want to hear it. And this is what can go through the government loud and clear, that it's not just trying to take land out of production for the heck of it. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Māori. Thank you for that. And Karina, I'll hand it over to you to provide the perspective from the Primary Sector Liaison Group.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's a valid question, and regardless of what the national drivers for this work is going to be, there will be some national directions coming out in. So this is not going away, even though we have been provided more time, and councils have been providing more time to get this right, as you said, Ruben. I think we should see this consultation as a starting point for further communications and collaborations and discussions with the community. So I think it is really important and worthwhile for landowners and the wider community to actually provide their view on this consultation and on what's being proposed. So what's going to work on the ground, what is not going to work, what are the alternatives if something is not working. Only the people that are actually affected by what is being proposed can provide that type of feedback. So I think that is one of the things that is really important to think about. I also think that we should remember that this is we should see this as a package of methods and activities. It's not only about provisions and hard, fast rules. So I would encourage people to also look at, for example, the draft action plan provided in the consultation material, where there's an opportunity for people to let NRC know what are the main things that they want to be supported on, what can NRC do to support change, for example. So that's something I think is also important to remember. It's not only about if something is permitted or if it needs to consent. So thinking about this as a kind of a package of different activities and methods to reach, I guess, improvements for the environment.
Kia ora, Karina. Thank you for that. Okay, so really the real take home is provide feedback to this process, as it enables us to build a better understanding as to how we can build a balanced approach. So I'm going to change tack now. I'm going to ask a question of Leon that's been put forward through the Q&A. And this relates to cultural impact assessments. And there's actually a couple of questions around these. So I'm going to, again, put these questions together. And Toy, I'll hand it over to you to provide your perspective after Leon has. So in terms of the cultural impact assessments that have been proposed through this draft plan, how will how is it anticipated that those will be paid for? And the second part, or the second tranche of that series of questions, is how does mana get put into those cultural impact assessments? And I'll just expand on that by you know, the individual asking the question has pointed out that in the past CIAs have sometimes been a bit of a box ticking exercise. So how do we give mana to that process?
Yes, thanks. So on the first issue, in terms of who pays, so I've written hundreds of applications. Many of them did require cultural impact assessments, and generally it is the applicant that will pay. Now, when it comes to the amount of assessment that needs to be undertaken, it really is commensurate with the scale of the activity. So a really big activity, wastewater treatment plant discharge, you're going to have years of consultation. That cultural impact assessment is going to be based off a lot of discussions, a lot of data, a lot of back and forth. If it's a private individual or, you know, a family farm, that sort of thing, you'd really hope that it's almost like a conversation with your neighbor. And that's a lot of the idea, is that it's not just about adding on another cost. It is about recognizing that there are other values that we need to assess, and regional council might not be able to do it. Our existing monitoring might not be able to do it. And that's where cultural impact assessment is beneficial, because you do have people who understand those values, and they can tell you what aspects of an activity could be affected as a result. So ideally, the costs will be commensurate with the level of effect. And as to your second question, how do we provide that mana? I think all parties need to be going into the process with an open mind. You shouldn't come with preconceived notions or preconceived conclusions. It really does have to be a back and forth. And just understand that at the end of the day, it will be council that makes the decision. So you may not agree with each other. As long as it goes through the process, then everybody's opinion can be considered, and it will be considered, and it isn't just flippant or thrown away. It really does get considered, and having that really good, genuine discussion and a true impact assessment is really helpful for the person who's having to go through and process that resource consent. Makes it a lot easier. Troy, you probably have a lot of insight on this as well.
Okay, thanks, Leon. So over to you, Troy.
I won't comment too much on the payment side. I think those who are going for the activities really should be paying for it. Clear and simple. But of course, there's a lot in there. It's not just really payments per se on a CIA. You got to put in the time and energy to build that relationship as well, that local hapu and the iwi. And just like Leon was talking about, sometimes these things could be quite large, especially if you're talking about infrastructure projects. So before you even get to the CIA question, it's really just kind of build on that relationship. Kind of going into these things, and I think the next question was really around how do we put mana into CIA. I think if we think about that, CIA has already got mana in it. May not be respected or given the mana in terms of those acknowledgements. And that's probably the part more so that we need to kind of think about and implement. But if you do have a good relationship with those, this process, because it is a process really, of building this relationship, putting getting back the CIA to be able to implement, in terms of resource consents in your projects, it's going to be beneficial. Easier said than done, of course. So really, when I think about this mana in CIA, there's a whole load of steps before we even talk about mana in CIA. There's got to be mana in that relationship. Well, the CIA itself actually has to have, basically, if you look at that, it takes its kind of whakapapa from whakaputanga, from te tiriti. Like a CIA process really should be a iwi-led, a tiriti-based document really, or process. And if you kind of think about, the legal framework of te tiriti, that really enables those Māori impact assessments, cultural impact assessment approaches to be taken seriously. And there's a lot to be done in that space, and a lot of and that council has no jurisdiction over necessarily. So it's a bigger picture than that, is what I'm trying to say. But really, these things do have to be taken seriously. Council is taking this very seriously, and that's why they've included it in these draft consultation documents. But we really want to understand more and receive those feedback from those out to how we can actually further ensure and implement that there is mana in these documents going forward.
Kia ora, Troy. Okay, so we've still got quite a few people online. What I'm going to do is we'll carry on answering questions for another 10 minutes, and then I'll close things off. Troy, stay on the line. I'm just going to ask you one more question. So we had a question put forward to us around the Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group, and I wondered if you could just spend a really brief amount of time just identifying how those members within the Tāngata Whenua Water Advisory Group came about and how the group was formed. Oh,
yeah. So this came about, I think, at the end of 2018. We were talking with Te TMAC, or one of the in-house council committees, the Māori Council Advisory, Māori I think it's Māori and advised. Marty, please correct me on this term, getting mixed up. But it's Māori and council in this working group together. And one of those, they were talking about this freshwater plan change and how to get Tangata Whenua voice more strongly included, yes, or in the process, or how to get a Tangata Whenua voice in the process. It's through those meetings with the TMAC that they determined that, they wanted to create the TWAG group. So TWAG itself is really a subgroup, perhaps, of the TMAC. We report back to the TMAC, but we also work with NRC. A call was put out amongst publicly and given to TMAC to filter out amongst those who were iwi and hapu representatives within the council committee, to kind of put out a tunnel for those that would be interested. We all applied with our CV. We got scrutinized and kind of put together into a band of misfits and people serious about why. And then from there, we started to go forward. So although that those representatives that had been mandated by iwi and hapu into TMAC had voiced the process, we weren't necessarily picked by them per se. It was picked by a ropu, and we're not there to necessarily represent, or we're not mandated on behalf of our iwi and hapu as such. We're a group. We're supposed to be an independent group, but for those who whakapapa back to Te Tai Tokiro, if that makes sense.
Kia ora, Troy. Thank you for that. Nice explanation. So I'm going to hand over to Justin to answer this question. So we're getting into a bit of the some technical questions here. So this relates to the modelled information that we used for the to help inform the rules. And so the question is around how confident are we in the modelling, given that the number of sample sites are relatively, well, they appear relatively low given the size of the region. So perhaps, Justin, if you can briefly get into that at 8 o'clock on a on a Thursday.
Yep, I'll have a crack. So basically, we've got about around 50 monitoring sites in our rivers across Northland. Tried to spread them out so they're representative of different sort of catchments or land use, land cover. We've also got about 16 lake sites as well. Those are monitored monthly, so sampled monthly. So that and some of these have been going for a very long time. So we've got quite extensive data sets. So we've got high confidence in what they're saying. So you can map trends and things. Usually you need 5 years data to get a good indication of baseline state, and you can look at trends after that point. In terms of the modelling, so we've used that monitored data to sort of extrapolate, if you like, into other areas where we don't have monitoring sites. Now, we don't have as much confidence in that modelling. Most models are wrong, but some are useful. It's an indication, and we've basically used the monitoring data, looked at sort of land cover, land use, and tried to extrapolate for this catchment, a similar catchment, a like catchment, with this sort of land cover, land use ratio, would expect something similar. So, yeah, way less confidence in the modelling, pretty high confidence in the monitored data. Nice one, Justin.
Stay on the line. I'm going to ask you another question. So this relates to the maps that we've produced. Well, the around with the 25-degree or larger or higher slopes, and so the question is around whether or not there's been any consideration of compensation for landowners that are affected by the provisions, any draft provisions around the slope layers.
Yeah, sure. And I've been queried on this one a few times to date. So basically, council hasn't landed any rules either or confirmed the maps, so that there are no confirmed rules at all. But assuming they were, those maps were picked up and there were provisions around stock access to, say, slopes over 25 degrees, the rules are very unlikely, and I can say that pretty confidently, to be a prohibition, a ban. It would be more like a process you go through, a consent process, resource consent, or potentially a freshwater farm plan process might be able to do the same thing. We could rely on that instead of a consent. But that said, unlikely to be compensation. The RMA is not a compensatory act. There is a mechanism for compensation in there, but it's only where a provision in a plan renders land incapable of reasonable use. So you couldn't use that land for any reasonable purpose as a result of a regional rule. You can seek compensation, but just by the fact that you need to get a consent doesn't render that land incapable of reasonable use. So in short, compensation, highly unlikely.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for that. Okay, so we're quickly approaching 8:10, where I'm going to close things off. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to ask each of our panelists a quickfire question. And all those questions that we haven't answered tonight, we will be answering online. They will be on our website, Why It Matters. And we're hoping to get all those responses through within a couple of weeks, hopefully within a week. So thank you all for those questions. And so I'm going to start with Councillor Jack Craw. And the question that I'm going to ask is it worth getting involved in the process, and why?
Yes, it absolutely is, because we'll be guided entirely by the kind of feedback we get. You know, if we get a whole lot of feedback saying, yes, we want greater protection, then we'll end up delivering you greater protection. Also, we'd like, actually, what we'd really like is for those people that are going to be materially affected to try and give us some idea of what it would cost them over time. Because I identified over 4 years ago when I first stood for council that this was going to be the biggest issue in terms of shifting the dial environmentally in Northland, but also in the cost of doing so. So we're not going to do this without taking everyone with us. So we'd like you to think about the destination, the long-term destination, rather than the short-term pain again, because we will be rolling these measures out over quite a long stretch of time. So nobody's going to go broke, but we are going to end up handing better waterways to our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Good, Jack. All right, John, Councillor John Blackwell, your thoughts on whether people should be getting involved in the process, and why?
I've been involved with Federated Farmers for many years, and with the policy team behind me, and I understand that farmers generally don't get in and submit, but this is such an important thing. I have a wee bit different view to Jack with this new policy coming out. There will be farmers who won't survive this in the present form. As a farmer, I am a farmer on this panel, home of Blackwell Contract Fencing, and I also submit my figures to Beef and Lamb New Zealand. I'm very concerned about what's going forward in this, and I want farmers, particularly farmers, to look at this from their point of view, and I farm a lot of 25-degree or steeper, and how that will affect you. And when you submit, try and submit in such a way that the things you don't like you'll mention, but also mention the ways that we can overcome the problems we're facing here today. So it's got to be positive as well as pointing out the weak points we're facing. Thank you.
Good, John. I think that's really sage advice around spending some time to provide some other options as well, in addition to your views around some of the challenges that we'll face. Okay, Marty, we're going a bit over time, so I'm going to hand it over to you, then Karina, and then Troy, and then I'll wrap things up. Oh, you're on mute, Marty.
In accepting what Councillor Blackwell says about some farmers won't survive or will have to transition, won't survive in present form, doesn't stop them, doesn't kick them off the land. It just means that in some places on their farms, there will have to be an alternative land use. And we know that some steep land has to go into forestry, that other land has to be changes that may accommodate that improvement in fresh water. And I really do want to have some people having open minds, not just saying this is going to put me out of business, but how can we continue business at both at our own strengths, that we can pay the bills, and also at the best for the community and the environment. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Marty. All right, Karina, your views.
Thank you. Yes, I think it is worthwhile, and it is important, as already been said, to if someone don't like something, if it's not going to work on the ground, tell NRC what is going to work, what are the alternatives that could work, and I think that is really important for landowners to provide that view. But I think also, even if I do think it is worthwhile, it is of course ultimately up to NRC if it is worthwhile for people to submit feedback, because it's all about how that feedback is received and what happens to that in the next step, and how that feedback is actually informing further discussions and collaborations with the community.
Thank you, Karina. All right, so there's a bit of a common theme there. Troy, you've got the last word around this question, and after that, I'll just provide a few parting words and close off with a karakia.
Well, there's two things that kind of come to my mind. Two, I guess, sayings that are quite well known. The first one is kind of relates to when the last water is dry, it would only be then that we realize that money cannot be drunken. We cannot satisfy our thirst with money. I guess that's the first thing. The second thing is there's a saying called go hard or go home. Te Tai Tokerau is our home. If we don't go hard, there will be no home. You know, clear and simple. We need a change. We need your voice represented in these draft plans. If you don't see your voice or your ideology in these plans, submit. Tell us about it. Like the councillor said, don't just complain about it and put in the thing that you don't like these things. Give us constructive feedback on what needs to change, how it needs to change. Provide us with examples. If the steep slope is going to affect you, tell us why. Give us some solutions and how we can address these things. I think that's probably the most important things in this. It's not whack a farmer. I guess it's whack a polluter. To be honest, it's probably whack all of us. We all probably need a good whack. But then there's a lot of us that need to be rewarded for this. And I think that's the other thing. There's a lot of farmers out there that are doing amazing things. And we should also, you know, tell those stories to us as well around the good work that's being done out there. Because like I said in my presentation, we all need to help each other. We all need to support each other in this, because it's not a Māori problem. This is not just a non-Māori problem. This is all of Te Tai Tokerau problem. And we need all of us to help solve and help kind of go forward as the great people we are from Te Tai Tokerau. So, kia ora.
Kia ora, Troy. All right, so we've gone 15 minutes over time. I just want to extend my gratitude to each of the panelists and also my team for your mahi throughout this entire process. And I also want to thank all those who have joined us online. Really appreciate the attention that you're giving this. Spread the word, give us some feedback. We look forward to hearing from you, and we will answer all the questions that we've received tonight. So without further delay, I'll close off with the karakia. Kia inoi tātou. Unahia, unahia. Unahia ki te urutapu nui. Kia wātia, kia mama, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairoa I te ara tangata. Ko ia rā I rongo. Whakairia ake ki runga. Kia tina. Hui e, tā ki e. Ka kite, everyone.